Gracie, can you drink water with that? So, in the beginning, good place to start. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and His Spirit hovered over the waters. There was no technology. There were no roads. There were no little rabbits. There were no people. In fact, there wasn't even any light. But out of that darkness, God spoke, and He said, "Let there be light." And suddenly light filled the darkness. And God looked at the light and He said, "This is good." And He took the light and He separated it from the darkness. And the light He called day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening and there was morning, and that was the first day. And then God said, "Let the waters that are below be separated from the waters above." So He took the waters and separated them in the space that was in between He called sky. Can you guys all hear me loud enough? Okay. And there was evening and there was morning, and that was the second day.
I'm sorry, miss.
and then God said, let dry land come up out of the waters. And dry land began to buckle up out of the waters. And God took the land and He separated it from the waters. And the waters He called sea, and the dry land He called land. And then with the word He spoke, and the hills were covered in green grass, and tall trees began to grow that almost touched the sky, and little tiny ones that you needed a microscope to see with, and trees that gave forth beautiful fruits that were sweet and they were sour and delicious to taste, and plants that you could eat the root or the stalk or the leaf. He created it all, and He looked at it and He said, "This is good." And there was evening and there was morning, and that was the third day. And then God said, "Let the skies above be filled with lights that will govern the day and govern the night, and that will mark different signs and different times and different years." And He created a greater light to govern the day and a smaller light to govern the night. And then He took thousands and thousands of diamond-like stars and He planted them in the sky. And they shone, and they all gave light to the earth. And He looked at it all and He said, "It is good." And it was evening and there was morning, and that was the fourth day. And then God said, with the word He spoke, and the skies were filled with winged creatures, and the seas were filled with great sea monsters. And He looked at it all and He said, "This is good." And that was the fifth day. Come on in, Doug. Don't worry, we're just on creation.
I didn't miss a thing.
And after He had filled the skies and He had filled the seas with creatures, He said, "Let this dry land be filled with creatures." And ones that crawled on their bellies, and ones that swung through trees with their arms, and some that had really long necks, and every sort of animal you could think of began to fill the earth. And then God said, "Let us create man. In our own image we will create them, male and female." And out of the dust He took dust, and He formed and created a man. And He breathed in his nostrils the breath of life. And then he became a living being. And then He took from his side a rib, and He formed and He fashioned a woman. And He breathed in her the breath of life. And she began to live. And God said, "Be joined together. Be married, have children, fill this earth, take care of these things that I've created." And He looked at everything He had made, and He said, this is very, very good. And there was evening and there was morning, and that was the sixth day. And on the seventh day, God looked at everything He created, and He took a lot of joy in it, and He rested on that day. And He made it a holy day, set apart. So, after God had created the heavens and the earth, He took the man, Adam, and He took the woman, Eve, that He had created, and He put them in a garden. And He told them, "Enjoy this place, take care of it. You guys can do whatever you want, eat from any tree in the garden. But there's one tree that you cannot eat from. It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. and in the day you eat of it, you will die. So Adam and Eve were going about their lives, enjoying themselves, enjoying one another, and one day, the most craftiest of all the creatures that had been created, and the most deceptive, the snake, slithered his way up to Eve. And he said, Eve, Eve, did God really say that you cannot eat from any tree in the garden? And Eve said, oh, that's not true. He only said that we could not eat from the one tree, and that if we ate from it, or if we even touched it, we would die. And the snake said, that's not true. God knows that if you eat from that tree, you will be like him, and you will know all things. You will be wise. And Eve, she looked at the fruit, and it did look very good. And she heard the snake's words, and she thought, I would kind of like to be like God. I want to know all things. And so she listened to the snake, and she disobeyed God. She took that fruit, and she bit into it, and then she gave it to her husband, Adam, who was with her, and he himself took and ate it. And suddenly their eyes were opened. And beforehand, they had been naked. They had felt no shame. But suddenly, when their eyes were opened, they became filled with shame, and seeing their nakedness, they took fig leaves and began to sew it together to cover their bodies. And when they heard God walking through the garden, they ran and they hid. And God called out, Adam, Eve, where are you? And Adam said, we're afraid, we're hiding because we realized that we were naked and we're ashamed. And God said, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from that tree that I told you not to eat from? And Adam said, well, it wasn't my fault. The woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it. And the woman said, well, it wasn't my fault. The snake that you created deceived me and I ate it. And God said, because you've done this, all the suffering in the world has now come. The man's life will be much harder. The woman's life will be much harder. And the worst part is that because of this, now you must leave this garden, and you will be separated from me, and you will die. And then God took, he took an animal, and he killed it, and he took the skins, and he covered them to cover their nakedness and to cover their shame. And then he made them leave the garden. But before they left, he gave them, it was like a promise. And he said, from now on, the descendants of the woman and the snake, they're going to have hatred between one another. They're going to have enmity. But one day a descendant of the woman is coming, and although the serpent might bite his heel, the descendant is going to crush his head. Well, Adam and Eve had to leave the garden, and that rebellion and that disobedience and that sin that began in the garden, it didn't stop with them. It kept going, and it began to fill the human race. And soon, even Adam and Eve's oldest son has killed their younger son out of envy and bitterness and anger. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. It's like a downward spiral of wickedness that just begins to affect everyone. And God looks at humanity and he sees that every thought of their heart and every intent of their heart and their mind is only to do evil and wickedness toward one another. And he's sorry that he had made man. But there was one person who found favor in his eyes. And this man's name was Noah, and Noah was someone who he walked in relationship with God. And God spoke to Noah and he said, I can see that every thought of man's mind and intent of the heart is only to do wickedness, and I'm going to wipe everything that has breath in it off the face of the earth. I'm sending a flood of water. But you have found favor in my eyes, and you have walked before me in righteousness. And so this is what I want you to do. You are to build this big boat. And this is it was like God's mercy to Noah and his family to save them from the flood. And Noah, he listened to what God said, and he began building that boat for years. He and his 3 sons built that boat. And now, at this time, the entire earth. It had never rained. It had just had a mist that covered the whole earth and watered everything. So the word rain, like what? Water falling out of the sky? So you can imagine, the people must have ridiculed and mocked Noah. And, but Noah, he just kept at it. He knew what God had said, and he walked in obedience to that. And finally God said, all right, in a week I'm sending the flood. I want you to get a pair of every kind of animals, and 7 pairs or kind of every kind of clean animal, and bring them into the ark, and then you and your family go in and close the door. And they did that, and after a week, God sent down the rain. And for 40 days and 40 nights, it had rained like no one had ever seen before, and the fountains of the deep burst open, and the water, it went so high, it covered the highest mountain. And for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the rain stopped. And Noah and his family were on that boat for like 10 months. And the waters began to recede and recede. And finally the boat came to a halt. It hit, or rested gently, on a Mount Ararat, which is in Turkey. It came to rest there. And when God gave the word, Noah opened the door, and they went out, and everything was just new. And the first thing that Noah did was to offer a sacrifice to God of thanksgiving for sparing their life. And God put a rainbow in the sky, and he said, this is my covenant to you. It's my promise that never again, even though everyone becomes filled with wickedness again, never again will I wipe out everything that has life in it, and send a flood to destroy the whole earth. And when it rains out, see that rainbow, and I will remember my covenant to you. And that was the first of many covenants that God would make with his people. Well, a couple hundred years pass, and a man named Abraham was born. Now, Abraham is considered the father of faith. He's like faith is like people who, they're sure of the things that they have a hope for, and they have a certainty of what they can't see. And they know that God's telling them to do something, or they know that God is, though they can't see what's coming up, they keep walking that journey even though they don't know what's going to happen, because they trust God. And Abraham was the father of those who live by faith. And he lived in modern day Iraq. And God called Abraham, and he said, Abraham, I want you to get up, take your family, take your belongings, and you're to go to a land that I'm going to show you. And so Abraham, they got up. He had no idea where he was going. Put his bag on his back, and he and his wife and their servants, they lived in tents. They were like a stranger in a strange land. And God gave Abraham 3 promises before he left. The first one was that he would have many descendants. And the second was that his descendants, they would become a great nation, and they would have land. And the third was that through his descendants and through his seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. You can imagine how happy Abraham and Sarah were when they heard this, because at that time, Sarah, she was barren. She couldn't have any kids, and she was kind of getting older in age. And so they were very happy that God was going to give them a son. Well, they waited a year, no kids. 2 years, 5 years, 10 years go by, and there's still no children. Has God forgotten his promise? Well, Sarah